place to be based. Yes, much
Oh, well,
better.
that's wonderful. Okay, so it seems like we're back. And without further ado, we can finally launch this. We are very, very happy to have Heidi here with us today. And all of you signed up for the talk, so you know some background information, but I'm still going to provide a little bit. So, Heidi is a behavioral scientist and a best selling author of Digital Self Mastery. Throughout the years, she has served as the executive producer of the Evolving Digital Self in Global Nomad Hacks podcasts. And so she has combined 25 years of experience in social strategy with her scholarly research into the human relationships with technology. And as evidenced by all of the technological troubles we've had in the last 5 minutes, that is something we all need to learn a little bit. So without further ado, Heidi, take the reins.
Well, thank you. And, it's quite funny that it seems like this kind of thing always happens when I do a talk about this book. And I think it's just sort of to give, it gives a little intro to some of the challenges but also just the fact that it's just our new reality. And the fascinating thing for me is this is the first talk I've done on this book since COVID, basically. We had, there was this book, the last of this series. So this is a series, there was two, and I was in the process of working on a third when COVID happened. And it had sort of evolved more into a full-time podcast. And a lot of things have changed, as we all know, in terms of adoption. And yet, over the last couple of days, I was sort of rereading the book and making some notes and whatnot in the more recent version, the Across Generations edition. And still the theories around our relationship with technology haven't necessarily changed. It's just that we as individuals have moved within the different profiles because we've been forced to. And it actually has confirmed a lot of the theories that I had applied to it rather than canceled them out. So that was a little bit reassuring after all the work that I did to put it together, that it actually still applies.
Absolutely.
Despite the fact that we've all been thrown, willingly or unwillingly into an environment where Zoom is just the natural go-to for how we engage with people. So it's been a really interesting evolution to see where this book sits. I was a little bit concerned that it would be out of date, quite frankly. When I was asked to do this talk, I said, oh, well, it may not be for another 8 months. I thought, oh, goodness, well, I'm going to have to see whether I need to do a whole lot of updating. But actually, it's really more, there's certainly some new cases and actually some reaffirmation. So it's given me some new inspiration for the next edition, which I had been sort of holding off for a while. So it's nice to be able to be here and share it with all of you here.
Heidi, may I ask, how did you get into this line of work? So it's very interesting, it's very topical, but it's also niche. And I'm just wondering what led you down this particular path.
Well, so I didn't necessarily choose this path, I guess you would say. I have always been passionate about people and about the ability to be, more, to be able to thrive when we connect through people. I'm much more of a humanist. It's just about, I've always been fascinated by human behavior, but at the same time, I love technology. And I was a very early adopter. When I was in school, I was one of the first, when they brought in the Apple IIes to our school. I was like, sign me up, I want to learn how to use these things. And so I was an early adopter to a lot of technologies, and yet it wasn't the only thing. I was interested in their capability to connect people rather than, being immersed in code. And so that has really sort of directed my career path. It was really about how can we use technology to connect people better. And that put me on a path of everything from, over the years, in education technology, doing, internet strategy and design for organizations, to eventually getting to a place where was recognizing that the adoption of technology was not based on skills, but it was actually more a question of people's relationship and in often cases toxic relationships around technology, and was just curious to dig deeper. So when I did finally go back and do my doctoral work, I found the opportunity to really dig deep into that and continue that path even after in postdoc work. So it's all about people for me. It's just that I want people to benefit from the technology, and often their relationship gets in the way.
That's the beauty of technology, right? Its intention is to bring us closer. So that's what we kind of need to grasp onto. During your response, you mentioned toxic relationships to technology. I'm just wondering if you can provide us with a possible example of that, if not thousands.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, it's if you look at it from a holistic perspective, it's everything from, for some people who have, based on different things going on with their body physiologically, they're very sensitive to electromagnetic frequencies, and so there you have sort of a physical demonstration of the toxicity of technology. But not everybody has that sensitivity level. I mean, obviously, we know from data around, if you live too close to a power line, that it can cause different things. I mean, there you have an extreme case, but
Yes.
some people even have, challenges with wearing a smartwatch, for example, or if they carry their phone too close to their bodies, they have adverse responses to that. So, that's more on the physiological side, but on the when you're looking from the holistic and sort of wellness perspective, it's everything from, the way that it can disrupt your sleep patterns. If you're leaving your phone in your bedroom and it's got notifications going off all night, then you're constantly responding to those, whether you're actually getting up and picking up the phone or whether you're just waking up, it's interrupting your sleep cycles. There's the wellness impact there on your sleep, which obviously has more impacts on the rest of your wellness going forward, and it messes with your neurotransmitters and everything, and you're not, you end up having issues with your serotonin and your dopamine. And then there's also we're also learning a lot more about the connection with the dopamine response to the feedback loops that you're getting. Now, those existed before. It's just that the technology augments them. It's when your friends say, "Oh, you look beautiful today," or, "I like your shirt," you get a dopamine response from that. Well, when you're getting that from every time you post a picture, or you don't get that, it can have the counter effect. So we're starting to learn a lot more about the other adverse effects, but on the side of for things like that like response and the dopamine triggers there, we have to remember that it's not necessarily the technology, it's the technology, what the technology is enabling, that is actually the toxic effect. So it's not, in that case, it's not the physiological and it's not the actual device that's causing the problem. It's the software or the design.
Sure. So another question I have, so I used to teach high school history and I loved it. I taught it for 3 years, but I saw a marked shift during that 3-year period, especially when compared to my high school experience. So when I was in high school, the iPhone had just come out. All right. So you had Instagram being developed, you had Facebook that was becoming an app, and it was still in these very rudimentary stages. Jump forward to the last 3 years, and there seems to be in the classroom a general lack of focus because of these devices. And would you say that that's something that can be fought? How can that be fought by educators? How can that be fought by parents? Or is it just something we have to kind of grow and adapt with?
Well, I think the general attention span has changed. It's not just the smartphones that are the cause of that. It's the way all communications has changed to rapid fire, small tidbits. Even when you look at commercials, people's attention span has changed there. Not that many people watch network TV anymore, but commercials do still exist. We just get them in different ways.
Yes.
But I think what's important to recognize there is that is it's a lot about building boundaries and recognizing where things are applicable. So I have two kids who are both Gen Z. My daughter is in college, and my son is building a startup in blockchain. Go figure. Working out in that space. But in observing the way that they learn, they used their devices in a very different way than I'm assuming you're a millennial, and then I'm Gen X, and my husband is actually on the baby boomer side. So we've got the whole span in our family, which is interesting to see. We're running the gamut, but I think that it's interesting to me to see the way that the digital natives use the technology is very different from the way that we use the technology. And I think they're better at building boundaries around it because it's counter to what you're saying, but I think they're better at building boundaries around it because it's just part of one of their ways of doing things. But the technology they have a more fluid relationship with it, whereas we look at it as something it's a plus. It's something that's added on. We're still trying to do things both manually and using the technology. So the way we perceive what they're doing is through our own lens rather than through their lens. And I'll give you an example of this. So my son, when we moved back from Sweden to the US, he was middle school. And he was playing a lot of video games. And I was pretty anti-video games when he first started. And I was very concerned about it. To me, they were just a distraction. What we discovered was these multiplayer games that he was playing kept him connected to his community in Sweden in a really beautiful way. In fact, he had gone to the international school the last time we were there, and he was playing with kids all around the globe when he was playing these games. And we were worried, he's sitting there playing games in his room, but then he would also have friends over and they would play, and then he'd, go out and play outside. So his social skills were still perfectly fine. But when I would say, well, you need to go out and hang out with your friends, he's like, I've been hanging out with my friends all day. I want to go read a book now. Like, I'm done. So to him, there was no differentiation there's no divide between the technology mediated interaction with his friends versus the physical interaction with his friends.
No.
And same thing with the way that they are learning now. When they are doing hybrid classes versus a face-to-face class, they choose it based on the convenience of when it works in their schedule, rather than, that's going to be a mediated class versus, versus face-to-face. So I think that the distraction piece, yes, I think that's part of the transition of where we are as a society. And, that there's always going to be challenges in terms of adoption and sort of getting that to a place where we all feel fluid about it.
Yes.
But I don't think that it's necessarily hindering their learning.
No.
I guess is what I'm coming down to.
Your point about your son's interactions via video games is fascinating, and I'm sure a lot of people in the audience right now can kind of reciprocate that. So during COVID, during the pandemic, in the height of lockdown, when people were immediately stripped of their social connections, I think a lot of people found out they were actually interacting a lot more than they would have been. So just anecdotally, like with my friends from college, I was talking with them via FaceTime, Zoom, 2 times a week. And these are people I'd see maybe once every 3 months. And so that trend has continued. Is that something that you've seen just uptick recently? Are we now kind of living in that hybrid world?
I think absolutely. And I think the beauty of it is that we're also seeing it when we talk about the generational piece. one of the biggest problems with seniors, and particularly in the U.S., where families don't necessarily stay living together in multi-generational environments anymore, and a lot of seniors are in more isolated situations. They're connected to their communities and to the access to whatever their needs are much more so than they were prior to COVID. Because during COVID, I mean, I'll give my mother as an example. I mean, my family is easy to throw under the bus or to use as examples. But my mother, prior to COVID, been living by herself in her house. And then all of a sudden, during COVID, she couldn't get out, right? And she lived by herself, but she used, because she had her computer and she was, using her technology, she started doing Zoom church, Zoom fitness classes,
yes.
Zoom cocktail hour with her friends. She was probably more social during that time than she had ever been before. And even when during about halfway through, we actually moved her into an independent living type environment because we were concerned about her. She has more of a potential dementia going on, and we were concerned about her living by herself. Well, she's continued that pattern even though she's moved into this new environment, and she is just thriving. And she's, now she's in the hybrid environment where she does have the physical interaction, but she's not as afraid of when they have, there are occasional lockdowns, when there are a bunch of COVID cases, and so they'll start saying, well, you have, the dining room's closed, you have to eat and you're okay, no problem. Well, she'll just reenact that group that has their COVID cocktail hour, and she continues with her gym classes. And I think that is a huge gift that a lot of people probably wouldn't have made that jump, particularly on the non-digital native side, had we not been forced into that trigger, that trauma, which in the book, Digital Self-Mastery, one of the things I looked at is sort of what are the things that cause us to create that change? And, we look at, the biggest changes usually occur because there's been some kind of a trigger for it, whether it's a trauma or whether it's a need or whether it's curiosity. There's always something that causes that change, because we're as humans, we like to be in an environment that we're comfortable in and develop our routines. But COVID, in a way, was kind of a gift for us because it forced us to really adopt the technology that was available to us, and also forced the technology to adjust to the realistic needs of what the world requires in order to connect more. Now, it's not all rosy.
No.
But I prefer to focus on the rosy side, because there's plenty of people that talk about the negatives, right? My work, people are always like, oh, well, it's all negative. I said, well, there's always something that, you can look at the downside. But I think what I like to help people understand is that there is a very strong upside as well. And if we focus only on the downside, we're missing out on some incredible opportunities.
No, and I started this conversation with my comment on classroom education and the distraction of cell phones. And like the further we've gone in this conversation, I'm only thinking of positives now. Like when you were just talking about your mother and during COVID and like doing the Zoom cocktail parties and stuff like that, all of this new technology and the hybrid universe we're living in, now you can engage in any hobby you want, regardless of location, regardless of equipment. I was taking Zoom cooking classes, Zoom cocktail making classes, all of these different things that I wasn't able to do because of timing, because of location. And now we have that opportunity. So while there are absolutely negatives, and I'm sure we could talk about those for hours, the positives are great and they're life changers.
For sure. I mean, I'll give you another example, when you're talking about learning. So I mentioned my son is working in Barcelona. So, my kids are half Swedish. So for them, and they've spent half their lives in the US and half their lives in Sweden. So for them, the global borders have never really existed. It wasn't sort of something that they were concerned about. But when my son was finished, the traditional education system was never well suited for him. He's an avid learner. He loves to just dig deep into a topic when he's curious about it. And in a traditional high school, there's not a lot of room for that. Especially a public high school that's massive. You challenge you start digging into it and challenge the teacher, and they're like, I got too many other students I got to focus on here. It's just unfortunate, but that is the way it is.
It doesn't afford those deeper dives sometimes.
Exactly. And he was really determined to find his own path. And he was very, very curious about blockchain and the technology behind it, and how to, and the potential for using it for creating sustainability solutions and things. And, it's a great thing to dig deep into, but it's not something that the schools, the universities have really caught up with in terms of teaching yet. They're talking about it, but they don't, it's still so new. So he just, during COVID, he spent, just hours and hours and hours just digging into taking master classes with anyone he could get his hands on, anything that was in that area, anything that tempted his curiosity. And he basically said, university's not for me. Now, I mean, I'm a PhD. I came from an academic background. My family is very academic. I was horrified, to be honest, I was horrified that my son didn't want to go to college. And I thought, okay, well, you could take a year off and figure this out, and,
Yes.
But eventually you'll go back to college.
Come to the likely conclusion. Yeah.
Yeah. And really the reality is he's ended up working with this, this team. They're building this blockchain company that is far more advanced than anything that he would have been doing had he gone to college. And we didn't have to pay for college. Most of the courses that he took were either free or, a couple $100.
Sure.
And he's got experts coming to him now.
That's
and
wonderful.
This is because of what technology was made accessible for him.
No, 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been something that was feasible. Now it's if not the norm, it's increasingly becoming very accessible.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's not to say that he can't go back to do university later if he wants to. But the point is the opportunities that are out there, if you are curious and want to learn, it's something that we never had. I mean, when I did my PhD, when I started university, they had computers, but they were basically word processors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Word processors and a little bit of, database things. By the time I did my PhD, I was able to finish my PhD. And this is part of what made me passionate about the potential for technology is I finished my PhD in 3.5 years, and the rest of my cohort finished in 5 or more.
Yeah, no, that's
because I was the topic area that I was doing my research in. I couldn't go into a library and look for the information. It was all very much all the newest things. So I had to do it from internet searches. I had to reach out to primary sources of people that did it. And I mean, my dissertation was the first of its kind that was crossover between behavioral science and wearable technologies. It wasn't something I was aiming for. It was just that's what was accessible to me, because I was doing all my research from direct sources, all online, and it was from accessing things that the paper version of the publishing wasn't even out yet, but the electronic versions were, and I was able to search PDFs for exactly the information that I was looking for, instead of having to read 1,000 pages to find the 20 pages that I needed the information for, and be able to extract that. So that I think that the way that we learn, we can, filter out the excess noise in a very different way than we ever could before, which affords us an opportunity to focus on being present in the world in a different way.
No, that's wonderful.
So
That's wonderful. One other question I have. So for some of the members in our audience, I'm hoping to beat them to the punch with this question. What are some steps you'd recommend if someone is trying to either learn a little bit more about all of the wealth of these digital resources, or even at a lower level, just trying to learn how to cope in a digital world? What would you recommend, and what's some advice you have?
well, I would say sort of there's three key things that well, there's more than three, but three that as a starter that I think are relevant to, doesn't matter who you are or where you are. I'm sorry, I don't know what that beeping is. Let me see, turn it off. I think it's a dishwasher. Sorry, I'm at a friend's house. Anyway, so there goes technology again. So boundaries is one, really just creating a space that is, time, especially if you're working from home or you're using technology at home, you don't have a designated sort of workspace and home space. It's important to keep distance between those. I think in my home, I have a docking station that when I go to bed, I dock all of my devices so they're charged and ready to go in the morning. On Fridays, I turn them all off at night so that they have a chance to fully reboot. And but they're not in my bedroom. Now, I have to confess, I do have an iPad in my bedroom, but I keep it on sort of the far side, because occasionally in the morning, I'll sit there and I'll read the news on my iPad, but I try to keep it as far away from my sleeping space, and I have all the notifications turned off on it. And on that particular iPad, I don't have anything loaded, any social media or any of that. So there's no distractions on that way. But I think it's more about keeping those boundaries that are safe for you, so that you can be fully present in life and in your interactions with other people, but the technology is accessible and ready for you when you need it.
Absolutely.
So those boundaries, I think, are really important.
And that can be hard for people. I mean, especially if you are completely online for work. That's a conversation I was having with my friends recently, that the 9 to 5 work days kind of eroded if you are online, because if you can answer a text via email at 2 p.m., why not answer an email at 8 or 9 o'clock, right? Because you're
exactly. And I think when you're in a leadership role of any kind, that's something that's really important, because you're creating the culture around what's acceptable. And that's the same as a parent or as it's basically leading by example, and, basically stating, and that's part of the boundaries. It's saying like, well, I may have this great idea, inspiration in the middle of the night, and I might text you so I don't forget it. But
yes,
your work hours are 9 to 5. So I don't expect a response.
Have some obligation. Yeah,
exactly. I don't expect a response from you until the next morning. If you happen to see it and want to respond, that is okay. But you have to really create those boundaries and create a culture where that is acceptable. If you're leading by the example of always on, then you're creating that sort of toxic environment where it is going to be sleep disruptive. It is going to be invasive into your, sort of that personal work life zone.
Work-life balance. Yeah.
Yeah. So boundaries is a big one. The other is actually, and some people laugh at this, but it's just my practice. And I think it's extremely helpful. And actually it's one of it's the woo-woo chapter in the book that I refer to. But it's about having a gratitude practice with your technology and being kind to it. And and that's starting the day with recognizing and appreciating it, and just like, when you get that call from your daughter or from your friend that you haven't heard, recognizing and thank you, technology, for making that happen.
You're making
for
this
me.
available. Yeah.
You're making this available to recognizing that that specific value for it. But it's, it's having that positive, it'll help you trigger that positive relationship with it. The other piece is, I often have a cable that I carry around with me that's broken, but most people probably have these telephone cables, charging cables that have exposed wires. Well, first of all, they're dangerous. Second of all, it's not being kind to your technology, and it's also it's impacting the charging capability of your phone. So over time it will, or any of your devices, over time it will erode the battery, and it's not being considerate to your device, your device. And if your device starts not behaving and your battery's not charging, you of course accuse the device of being the problem. Well, it's not the device that's the problem. You haven't been caring for it.
Problem. Yeah.
Exactly. You haven't been caring for it. And it's important to sort of recognize, like, it's, when you're breaking your screen all the time and things like that, it's important to take care of, just like with any relationship, it's important to be kind and care for the things that are taking care of you. So if you develop this gratitude practice and recognize it as something that is not just a utility for you, but something that is actually adding quality to your life, then you have a little more respect and appreciation for it.
That's fascinating.
And it will serve you better.
Well, because I think it's a really interesting point, because let's say hypothetically you break a mirror, right? You're at fault. You made a mistake. The mirror isn't faulty. You're just being silly. But if you break an iPhone, you break an iPad, suddenly that's a cheap device. It's not strong enough. The company is at fault. It's interesting, and it shows that we don't have an innate appreciation for it. Everyone's very quick to blame the device as opposed to just take care of it.
Yeah. And even, as I mentioned before, like docking your devices and turning them off on Fridays, so that, one, it gives you a sense of pause and it gives you time away from it, but it also gives them a chance to fully reboot and reset. Often, this is something I catch myself doing, as well as others, when they say, oh, well, my phone is just responding really slowly. And you look at it and you see they've got about 45 different apps open at the same time, because they never close their apps. Well, each one of those is operating in the background. So your phone is not being slow.
It's going to drain your battery.
Your phone is being drained because it's got too many things. So when you reboot it, you also want to remember to actually close down all of your apps. And same thing with your desktop. If your desktop has got a bunch of things open at the same time, it's going to be chaos. It's going to be very busy trying to make all of those things work. So that's probably what's slowing things down, when you've got things running in the background that you've completely forgotten about. So it's, part of that is being kind to your devices, and part of that is really just remembering that it's, it's a limited device, and the incredible capacity of these tiny little devices. It can get overloaded, especially when we put too many things on it. The other thing is just capacity for things like images. I don't know about any of you, but my phone is basically my camera. I don't carry a camera anymore. But I also don't keep the large images and videos on my phone, because those also take up a huge amount of processing and memory power. And there's so many great systems for backing them up, so that they don't have to be sitting, same on your computer, they don't have to be sitting on your hard drive. You can have an external hard drive, or you can put them in the cloud. And if you're like me, where I travel a lot, and so I need to have access things sometimes in places where I don't have a great internet connection, I carry around a little terabyte memory block that I back everything up to, as well as Dropbox. So I back up my Dropbox onto this disk, or onto this drive. And I mean, nowadays it's not much bigger than my phone. So it's a pretty easy solution to not lose your memories, not lose your documents, or whatever it is you need to get access to. So I think those things really will make your relationship a lot easier, because your devices are going to behave more the way you expect them to.
Definitely. Do you think, or have you found in your research and your studies, that oftentimes people grow frustrated with technology, with some of these platforms, not because of any flaws with the technology, but because there just isn't really a widespread understanding of the minutia of some of these devices, right? Like you can't really comprehend, or at least from my perspective, I can't comprehend how coding works, how
Mm.
software is developed. Whereas if you're talking about writing a poem, you can look at it. You may have learned that in English class. You know the syntax, you know the structure, but with something like Java or coding, like that's not something that we really know as a society. So do you think people are just kind of misinformed often when it comes to technology?
I, it's an interesting question. I don't know if it's necessarily a question of being misinformed, because
Mhm.
it's not like, in order to use a toaster, you need to know how to build a
Sure.
toaster,
No, I
right?
agree.
And that I think that the key thing is recognizing where, um, what is the value add of knowing more or
Mhm.
knowing enough. Just how much do you need to know,
Yes.
And then on the other side of the spectrum, just because you know how to do it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it yourself, right? So if there's an issue with your software, that doesn't mean that you need to go in and reprogram the software, right? You
Mhm.
don't necessarily need to know that. You could give feedback to the company, but it may also be a different issue. But the problem that we often get caught up with in technology is we want to fix everything ourselves, and sometimes it's better to have somebody else do it. That's their specialty, and it's not just that applies to so many different areas across the board, not just
Mhm.
technology.
No,
Of
exactly.
it's sometimes we just need to have trust, and that's where, if you have that relationship where you're developing that gratitude practice and you have proper boundaries around your technology, that trust is a lot easier to lean into,
Mhm.
and also to understand who you can lean on when you do need assistance. So there's lots of great resources. I mean, think about YouTube. I mean,
Sure.
it's not just our kids that are using YouTube to learn everything. I
Yeah.
asked my mother something the other day, and she's like, "Oh, well, let's just look it up on YouTube. I can learn." I
Great.
was like, "What?"
That's great.
This is my 82-year-old mother telling me to go
Wonderful.
find a YouTube video to figure out how to do it. It it's across the board, and
Mhm.
so I think we don't have to all do it alone, and
No.
we'll let the technology help us where it can, but it's also not unlimited. I mean, I do live by the philosophy, or I believe very much in, it's a question of when, not if, and most things that we're, the potential for technology and how we can use it.
Mhm.
But I also don't feel that I need to be the expert on how to do things. I want to understand, you know, how things work in terms of what's needed from my side, or whether I should choose to use this technology versus that technology. But I don't necessarily need to create that technology
No.
or be the
No.
master of it.
Exactly. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I'm looking at the clock and we have 15 minutes left. And so what I'd love to do right now is take a minute, and if you have any questions, and we have a pretty big audience right now, please throw your questions into the chat. And so I can moderate those and I can ask those questions, but just please take a minute right now and you can mute your mics and put them into the chat, and then we'll get through all of them if we can.
Is that your actual background while you're looking at the chat? Are you actually sitting in the library?
I am. I am. I
I
went
think
from one of the
you need to take a picture of that. That's like the perfect backdrop.
I know. I love having some meetings in front of it. It's wonderful. And I went from the reading room upstairs, which is also beautiful, but now I'm looking at this and I'm like, no, this works.
I miss old libraries and card catalogs. I really do. I
Next time,
don't
next
see
time
enough
you're
of
in
them.
New England.
Well,
Definitely
I
stop.
go often. My mother's in New England, and my daughter. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right, guys, any questions? Is it not letting? Oh, you know what? I'm seeing some questions come in now, Jesse, but try again, and we'll see if it works. So let's see. Here's one question, and this is from Timothy. What about the issue of trusting what you see online without question or seeking multiple sources? That's a wonderful question. That's a wonderful, wonderful question.
Yeah, so I touch on that in my book, and I think it's absolutely one of the skill sets that is becoming more and more important. And when we talked earlier about schools, I think that's one of the places that I saw a lot of it actually when my kids were in high school, that there is a lot of conversations around, what kind of sources are trusted sources. That's not to say that how can you define this reliable? But I think what it really comes down to is learning about critical thinking. And unfortunately, we're not born with critical thinking. That's something that's really more of a learned skill. And it's not taught enough in schools, and it's not even in families. We're often not, we're not using those skills. We sort of are reactive rather than, understanding where things are coming from, what's the intention behind it, and everything from learning the slant of journalism to just a statement or an image. And of course, it gets more complicated when you have things like AI that can, have someone else's voice coming out of a different place.
Last night. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, there's entertaining sources like that, but there's also real uses of that can be very confusing. But I think what's really, what it comes down to is really trying to, as my mother would say, put on your thinking hat and be critical of everything, not in a negative way, but just to recognize the sources, recognize where the people are coming from. And we do this with people every day. When you're having a conversation with a friend, you try to remember, what their background is, why, why are they saying what they're saying? What's their history that might be leading to what's coming out of their mouth, or what they're saying. But we often don't do that when we're surfing the internet or particularly if you're scrolling on something like Instagram or Twitter or whatever, or you have notifications that are popping up that, you sort of assume it's news.
Yes.
Well, it's maybe not news. It's news according to, and it's remember to, so I think it's important to add that according to in each interpretation of whatever we read or see. And that helps us understand a little bit better and not be as reactive. It's a difficult question. I mean, easier said than done.
Absolutely.
I get that. And I have to remind myself that on a regular basis. I'm fortunate in that being married to a Swede who's sort of a newsaholic, I get everything filtered according to him, but I agree mostly to what he says. So I have to say for myself, I don't read the news very much anymore because I find that for me, it's a trigger.
Sure.
And so I get my news according to him.
No, that's good. It's a nice filter.
It's a nice filter.
That's so funny. And I mean, just to speak to that question a little bit from my own perspective too, it can be really hard. I used to teach government classes, history classes, and this is for high school students. And so whereas when I was in college, when I was in high school, it was very easy to kind of deduce what a reliable source was. It has scholarly peer review going on, or it's coming from one of our preconceived reliable news sources, i.e. New York Times, et cetera, et cetera. That isn't the way the digital landscape works at all now.
Nope.
And so it can be very scary from the adult perspective, from the student perspective, because if you see it written down in words, there's, for whatever reason, this human perception that makes it true. It gives the author some credence that may not exist. So just because you see a comment Just because you see
Mhm.
something that is framed as an article does not mean it has gone through any of these journalistic practices. I could just go
Yeah.
on WordPress right now and write lies if I wanted to. It's scary, but it's true. Let's see. We have some more questions coming in. Okay, let's see. So Judith asked if we could give a little bit of a summary of what we talked about from 12 o'clock to 12:30, just because she came in a little late. So what did we talk about? We were all over the place.
We're a little bit all over the place.
So we were talking a little bit about the health effects of technology, as well as reliable practices, and how COVID really and the pandemic has created this hybrid, and that's a word that's thrown around a lot, this hybrid landscape. So that's a bit of it. That's a bit of it. So here's a question from Jesse. So I will read this out. Jesse says, my kids argue that reading a book online is essentially the same as reading a physical book. I don't believe it. Do we know what happens to dopamine levels from looking at a screen for so long? I know you said dopamine is affected by social media.
Well, so they're two different things. I don't think, I think one thing that's another critical practice from a health and wellness perspective is when you're working with a screen, I always wear blue blocker glasses. So, and because I'm on, yeah. So when I'm on a screen most of the time. So my regular glasses have blue blockers in them. And that will actually counter the negative effects of the actual screen. In terms of your question around consuming a book on the screen versus on the page, just be happy that they're reading. I think that that's a really important skill for them to keep up. And if they're willing to do it on a screen, go for it. I think it's unfortunate that a lot of kids are really only consuming things from watching them on video at this point, and they're losing the skill to read. Just like I feel like I'm losing the skill to write physically with a pen. My hand aches when I write with a pen now because I don't do enough of it. And my kids can't read my mother's handwriting, for example, because they don't learn penmanship in school anymore. They don't learn script. Yeah. So I think that, again, it's moving forward in time, and we have to get used to these transitions. But the fact that they're still reading is fabulous. But I would highly recommend getting them blue blocker glasses, and that will counter the negative effects of using the screen. Also, the Kindles are great because they do have a blue blocker built right into it, and they also have a non-glare screen.
That's wonderful. I saw some hands raised. Jane, did you have a question?
I just had a quick question that sort of answers maybe what Judith asked, and that is, will this be, you're recording this?
Yes.
And therefore, will all of our friends who didn't watch the whole thing or any of it be able to see it? In what form? Will Pequot Library send out an email about how to access it? Because I can think of a lot of, I think this is fabulous, and I actually have to leave now, but I think I'd love to share it with many people.
Definitely. So what I can tell you is we will certainly be putting it up on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. And so I can't give an exact timeline as to when it'll appear there, but at some point in the next month, if you check on our YouTube channel, it will be up there. And I can personally make sure you get one, Jane.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Bye. And thank you very much, Heidi. I enjoyed this far more than I thought, and I'm in your mother. I would like to meet your mother because I have a parallel life. So
fabulous. Thank you.
Great, guys. Does anyone have any last minute questions or comments? Great. Well, wonderful, guys. Thank you so much for coming, and a big thank you to Heidi. That was wonderful. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
My pleasure.
And yeah. All right, guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Heidi.
No problem. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Nice to see you. Bye.
Nice to see you too.